Okay. All right, you guys should be able to see this in slideshow mode. Are we good?
Yep.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you. It's been a while since we have gotten together. May was our last meeting. I don't know how the time flew, but it did. Even though we were in COVID and all standing around thinking that we wanted to go out and do something, Steve and I focused on building an open source community, and it has been a whirlwind. Just to make sure we all know who each other are, Phil Gibbs. Phil was one of the initial masterminds behind what we call our domain structure. He is now head of technology services at a company called Red Flag Alert, and he is out of the UK. Christopher, I didn't have a picture for you, so I made you our evil lord. But he's a DevOps program owner at Unisys and one of our end users. Doug Orr, he is now, I don't know if this is still where you're at right now, Doug, but let's just say Doug is infamous in the Kubernetes world. He came from Google. He is a local New Mexican, and that's where we met him. And he has been.
Hey, Tracy.
Yes?
I'm seeing the first slide. I'm not sure if everyone else is just seeing the first slide.
Really? What is hanging? What is going on with Google anymore? I mean, with Zoom. Let me see. Do it this way. All right. I'm gonna. Okay, you guys still can see my screen, right?
No.
No.
Now we're seeing us.
You're seeing you. Okay, let me do this again. I'm going to share my entire screen. It does not look like it's sharing my screen.
Yeah.
You just had
a second slide there for a second.
Okay, I'll wait. Tell me when you can see it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I am going to keep it out of the other mode because I think that causes problems.
Okay.
So Doug Orr has been a mentor to us and a coach from the very beginning, along with Tim Kelton, who we met at Descartes Labs. He's no longer there. I don't know why I didn't update that. He now works in the autonomous auto field with a company called Aurora. Is that correct, Tim? I think it is.
Yes.
Correct. Yes. Tara, Tara Hernandez, we've met her through the CD Foundation. She has been pretty instrumental because she was the one who recommended our open source project to the CDF. Jeremy Davis, I met on a LinkedIn connection, as well as Hank. Jeremy is a chief architect at Red Hat and had some really interesting insights for me when I first spoke to him. So I said, please join our TOC because we are in a pretty critical place in terms of the product. Hank is the same way. He is part of the open source community, works for BP. Michael Galloway, he's going to try to be here today. He has father duties to do in the mornings, but he is a senior engineering manager at Netflix and has been also somebody who has kept tabs on us and has been looking at how we're managing some components that may solve some of the Netflix problems. And Bill Pertelli has been a friend and mentor and a coach for the last several years. I've known Bill probably going on 15, 20 years, and he has helped with giving us direction around how to build out a SaaS model and been a sounding board for us over the course of the last 2 years. Just to do an 8-month recap, because that's how long it's been since we've spoken, and I'll just kind of go over some of the things we covered there and where we're at. So in May, we talked about the redesign of the GUI. That was our primary focus around the TOC. We did deliver that in July. Believe me, it was a crazy May, June, and July for Steve and I getting that pulled all together. We merged all the downstream code of Deploy Hub with Ortelius because we knew we were going to really focus on building out that community. And we focused on growing the Ortelius community. We now have about 120 members. And I would say there's 20 folks who are active and excited about working on this particular project and solving this particular problem. We have architecture meetings, outreach meetings, and general working group meetings every other week to keep everybody on top of things. Right now, we're working on a blogathon. If any of you are interested in contributing to the blogathon, we would love to have it. We converted all the help documentation into a doxy format. We moved from the Jenkins source code compile process that we were doing to Google Cloud Build, and we're ready now for the open source community to start doing pull requests and pushing that so it gets automatically created. On that note, we're doing the same thing with the website. That will be delivered by the 15th of March, where it's all in a Hugo server with Doxy so that we can have everybody contributing to the website. We are following as much as we can how Jenkins did that. We enhanced some of the APIs and the Jenkins Groovy library. We added a CLI for updating component versions, application versions, and for performing deployments, as well as a Circle CI org for managing component to test application and pushing application test workflows based on a component update. And then we have started adding new microservices back to into the functionality. And Steve's going to cover some of that. December 8th, we were officially welcomed into the CD Foundation as an incubating project. Again, Tara Hernandez at Google was sort of our inside advocate. I think she really gets what we're doing. She understands, I think, from her Google experience, the complexities around managing these relationships before they get deployed. So she's been pretty excited about what we're doing. The open source community has been amazing. Some of them are on today. Christopher Hicks, Neetu, Jane, Siddharth Parikh, Marky Jackson, Owen Bowers, Adams, and Parajat Kaliti. They've all, and Sasha and Karam and Sergio and Natch, all have been super involved. Parajat and Neetu were the two to first step up and be community managers. Marky Jackson did some initial coaching with them. Siddharth has since stepped in and helped as well. Christopher, Karam, Owen, and Sasha have all really just jumped in terms of understanding the architecture and starting to get involved. Sasha gave himself a new name yesterday called the Git Destroyer, which we thought was pretty funny. And then Sergio has stepped in recently and has been a real trooper, helping us do some initial designs around a reward system and badges. And Natch is somebody who we want to attract more of. He is a graduate research assistant at New Jersey Institute of Tech. And excited about learning to be part of an open source community. So we've really worked to try to increase a diversity in this program. I really push women to get involved, so I both Parajat and Neetu have been super helpful in getting that done. We have submitted to become part of GSOC. We have three basic projects that we've submitted. 2 are integration projects, Spinnaker and Argo CD. I actually spoke to somebody who is someone who does a lot of machine learning and is a data scientist to work with us on doing data graphs and sort of expanding the current visualization of our relationship graphs that we're working on, and start thinking about how we can use some of the data that we now have to start doing more predictive analysis. And on that note, I am going to ask for questions, and then I'm going to let Steve go through what I call our big rocks. These are our primary goals for not just the next quarter through the summer, but really through third quarter of 2021. Comments, questions, concerns?
All right, we'll take silence.
I'll ask one real quick. You showed the Jenkins Groovy library and then also Spinnaker and Argo CD integrations that you're working on. Are you seeing a shift from Jenkins has kind of been a core feature and way people used the service in the past? So are you seeing kind of a shift that you're trying to go after there? Is that?
No, what we're actually seeing is people that have invested heavily in Jenkins are sticking with Jenkins, and new companies like new startups, smaller projects are adopting the GitOps methodology right off the bat. So the transition from a Jenkins pipeline to GitOps, they're two ends of the universe. So we haven't seen people, do a huge move all the way from Jenkins over to a GitOps methodology yet. That's why we're supporting both. The Jenkins side is still going to be there with our Groovy library. We did add basically a CLI that allows us it can be delivered as a Python library or as a Docker image. So like the Circle CI orb, Circle CI uses container images to run. So that's where we built the Docker image with the Python library in it to do that integration. So that's kind of like what we're seeing right now as part of that process. Some of the new things that we're on the CI CD front that we're excited about is some of the event-driven CI tools like Captain that looks promising as part of the process.
Yeah, I would guess that we probably will be, before the end of the year, be adding events, having us called as an event. I think that most people in the CD space are pretty excited about events, and there is a new working group at the CD Foundation that I'm working on. That's the events working group, and we're looking at, what that control plane looks like and what the protocols will be. But I personally, I think that tools like Jenkins will be replaced by event-driven tools like Puppet, Nebula, and Captain. And I think GitOps will be there, but it's still going to be a push because you're going to push to a repository, and then the state engine of the GitOps operator will take care of the rest.
So some of the things that we've been working on is this came out over a year ago with Netflix and the concept of component sets. What we've recognized is even though microservices are supposed to be loosely coupled, there are scenarios where they need to be tightly bound together so they all are moved through the pipeline as a unit. So we're in the process of introducing what we're calling component sets. We did do a meeting with Intuit, Armory, OpsMX, Netflix around this topic and how like Argo CD. So Intuit uses Argo CD as part of the process, and Netflix obviously uses a version of Spinnaker. So the concepts that they had around what they're calling application sets was some confusing terminology, and we were trying to find out if we had overlap with those tools. And what we recognized was what they're calling application sets has nothing to do with applications really. And so we're going to move forward with what we're going to call component sets, that the ability to tightly couple a set of microservices together or components and version that component set and be able to track that as one of the relationships. And that will be rolled into the application package.
Now on that, what came out of that discussion was we may need to change some of our naming and get rid of the term application completely and change it to product.
Yeah, it seems like the concept of a product, which is going to be a collection of services, makes more sense than an application. So like in the Netflix world, they call every service an application. So the word application is just being reused and misunderstood a lot. So right now we're considering product as the replacement for application.
It's a big effort, so we haven't rushed to do it. We're trying to get some feedback to make sure.
If you look at the documentation, hundreds of pages of documentation that refer to application and application versions. So that one's going to be a big lift, and that's why we're still hesitant on that one right now.
So any feedback on that would be helpful. If you can send us an email and say, yeah, we thought about it and this is what we think.
So one of the next features that we're going to be adding is around what came about from the our interviews with some of our contributors from the SRE and Ops side, and also like Tyler Jewell from Dell Capital recommended us look at the more of a service catalog where information about the service, who is the owner of the service, how do I get a hold of them, what's the development Slack channel, is there any pager duty service associated with this microservice, what are how do I get to the runtime logs, are there any transaction logs around telemetry that we need to look at and associate, and then also the key value pairs that are associated with that. So that's just some of the service catalog information that we're going to be adding at the component level, and then that will roll up to the application level, and then that'll be visible. One of the other things that, I don't know if it's on the next slide, but we are looking at going into the containers and pulling in information from scanning tools like SNCC, Cyclone DX, to get the licenses that are being used in the container. So like the Node.js packages, the Go modules, those type of things. Figure out the licenses, the CVEs, and roll those up to the component level, and then roll it up again to the application level. So somebody can look at an application and see if there's any license violations, for example. Now that initial gathering of that information will then feed downstream to being able to do policy control. Can I deploy this, or is there a policy violation because there's a service that's consuming a license that hasn't been approved by the attorneys, for example. So policy control is going to be on the backtail of this information that we're going to gather. We're not focusing on policy these next 2 quarters, but that will probably be fourth quarter or first quarter next year.
And again, there's a policy working group coming out of the interoperability working group at the CDF, and we're trying to standardize on what those policies could potentially look like that we could then base our policy engine on.
And and this is where we kind of circle back around to the event-driven CI, because we'll have this information. Let's say there's CVEs that are out there that are high that we want to do some extra testing on, that you can get into more of a dynamic pipeline process based on the information that we're gathering. So if you have a high CVE, to actually check to see if you're actually using that part of the code base or what the exposure is. So you may take a different route, go through a longer testing pipeline than, go from development right out to production type of scenario. So that's some of the things that with this data that we're collecting, we'll be able to do some interesting things down the road. Go to the next one. And then like I said, in that meeting that we had with Intuit and Netflix and everybody, the interesting part around Intuit, like I said, uses Argo and the GitOps model. We are in the process. We've had some new people join that have some familiarity with Argo, as well as like the Weaveworks, FluxD, and Rancher has one called Fleet. We're looking at those GitOps solutions to see how Ortelius can fit into a GitOps model. Right now, it looks like we'll be able to, instead of deploying Helm chart to a cluster and using Helm directly to the cluster, that we'd actually deploy YAML to a Git repo, and then from there, once we do the push and that part, the GitOps process takes over from there. as part of that. There'll still be hooks in there, so we can, most of those tools, the Git operators, have a notification process, so we can get notified when everything's done, and we can keep track of all the metadata that's happening and what got deployed where at that level. So that's just one of the things that we're looking at. We're still scoping out how we're going to do it, the design part, but that is, it doesn't look too bad for us to bring in that type of solution.
So one of the kind of the more vocalized problems around GitOps is the number of YAML files that you have to support, particularly when you have several different environments or clusters you're rolling out to, and those clusters have different key value pairs or configurations that you're having to update. I recently did a pros and cons of GitOps, and I kind of did the math around what you would have to manage, and you're looking at managing potentially hundreds of YAML files and branches, and that is what a lot of the current GitOps users are starting to complain about. So the goal here would be to replace that human effort of updating all of those YAML files manually, and instead be the central repository that generates those YAML files and then updates the proper Git repository. So we basically still do a push, even though GitOps is a pull mechanism. We're just pushing to the repository.
Tracy, I have a question on that.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay if I?
Yes,
jump
please
in.
do. Hi, Michael.
Okay.
We introduced you earlier, and I said fatherhood was in the way in the morning.
It was, yeah. It'll pull me away again probably in about 20 minutes. But
okay.
So this is an interesting problem. This is a problem that we definitely know at Netflix in terms of as we have moved more and more towards YAML-based configuration for infrastructure and CI/CD and all kinds of other things. This question of how do we manage all of these configs has popped up. One way that I know that folks have been attempting to test out ways to update YAMLs within the repository directly is through, oh my gosh, the name just flipped right out of my head. Shoot, it starts with an A. It's not, oh gosh, I got to find it. There is a service that I know that specifically is good for this like distributed updating of the repos. I just wonder if there's ways to maybe integrate with those services or figure out if those services might be useful to leverage. Just it seems like a big problem to solve specifically that one.
And that's one of the things that the point that we're at right now is when you look at a GitOps methodology, the Git repo that's depending on who you talk to, one of them is called an environment repository where you have all the Kubernetes manifest files in that repository. Depending on who you're talking to on the cluster side, if it's a FluxD versus Fleet versus Argo CD's operator over there, they all expect a slightly different directory structure of where files should be and how they should be named and things like that. And I'm on the GitOps working group that's on the CNCF side, listening in to see how they're going to kind of standardize that to figure out how we're going to integrate into that. But whatever open source tools that you know out there that we can leverage, like you said, to be able to update the manifests in the repo would be great, because we definitely don't want to write something from scratch.
Yeah, that part, and it doesn't seem like it's a big differentiator in the sense that, like, you know, it's itself kind of an unusual problem on its own. So yeah, let me see if I can find the ones that I was aware of. Maybe it's a fit, maybe it's not. I don't know. Yeah. I'll see what I can find.
And the problem we're finding is that, and we're hoping that the GitOps SIG at the CNCF will address this, but all the operators are requiring different formats of the YAML information.
Yeah, that's another problem. That's a big problem. Yeah. Sorry.
You know,
to
so
interrupt,
do we
Tracy.
integrate with Argo CD for do we integrate with the Flex operator or the Fleet operator or the Argo operator?
And then there's IBM has Razor, so there's all these different, and a lot of the implementations that we're seeing, like with Rancher's Fleet, they don't care how you name the YAML files. What they do is they actually go into the files and look for specific labels. For example, is this snippet of manifest for my cluster? Is it labeled for my cluster? That type of thing. So it really, which makes sense, because then what ends up happening, like with Fleet, is you check in a change to the Git repo, and it doesn't matter what the change is, but everybody gets notified that that is looking at that repo, there was a change. Go figure out if you have to do something with that change. So they throw it over the fence to the cluster side, and the cluster goes back to the repo and starts looking for a change that it needs to act upon to bring it into the correct state. So there's different implementations, and that's one of the things that is tricky with this one.
As well as the Git operators themselves are starting to store some of the override information, which obfuscates that even farther from what you can see easily. So the operator itself defines those values, so you don't have to define it in the YAML file. But then you don't know what those values are if you're the developer. You have to go back to the GitOps operator, try to figure it out. So it's just a lot of the information is so buried in the scripts and inside of these locations that it's not visible. What we'll try to do is be that visibility, as well as generate the files to be pushed up to Git. If they can just, especially we're kind of, this is be something that'll be later in the year. We're hoping that that there's some standards that are defined, so we know what we can write to. And if we don't get those standards, we'll probably support something like Rancher, is our thoughts right now. Of course, help on that decision is always welcome.
And then some of the things that we pushed off onto the back burner, we did some initial work around Istio, basically because we know what a version of an application looks like and how it compares to the current production version, that we can update the Istio routes dynamically to say, here's your new version. These are the 5 services that I want you to route to for this persona. And then everything else is going to come from the production services. So we did some work on that. We are actually in the process of slowly rolling this out into Ortelius itself. We've moved the website and all the documentation, like Tracy was saying, into Hugo-based containers. So those are running in a Kubernetes cluster over in Azure. And we have Istio right now doing some basic routing for that. But we're going to slowly keep on extending that out as far as the routing that we can do with the knowledge that we have on the Ortelius side. And then
well, on that Istio, we have, we were a little concerned about doing too much integration in terms of the service mesh until we decided who might be winning. It kind of looks like Istio's winning. We don't see Linkerd very often. So I think that we'll probably stick with Istio unless anybody sees something else that's changing, because it's kind of like the GitOps problem. Which one do you integrate to? Which is the most important one to go with first? We think Istio will be the long-term winner, though.
The maybe key point there is just whoever wins, it's probably going to be an Envoy-based solution. That's what's really where I'm seeing adoption, whether that's north-south, on your ingress coming in, or whether it's kind of east-west traffic and doing more service-to-service side. Everything seems to be going more and more toward Envoy-based, at least what we're using.
Right, exactly. And that's where one of the things back on the the service catalog, the information that we're going to be gathering, looking at the transaction logs, that's something like Envoy's kicking out. So to be able to, for this service, what type of transactions are going through it, and how's it relating to the other services that are out there. So we'll definitely keep an eye on Envoy. And then finally, last time we spoke, we were looking at FOSSA and Sonatype integration. We did look at those, and what we're seeing is the SPDX has version 2 out, and that's slowly being adopted. Mainly, the SPDX is focused on the licensing that's in the packages like the Node.js, the Python modules, etc. So that information is becoming more standardized, and we're able to pull that out. Also, there's another project called Cyclone DX that basically does the same thing as SPDX, slightly different JSON format, but the same idea. And we're looking at those two to be able to pull that information up into Ortelius.
And then 2 last things. This was shared with everybody. It's out at a Google Doc. So this is how you can get to the Google groups if you want more information on what we're doing and more insight into what the open source community is doing. And there's the Discord channel invite. Welcome all of you to, check in on the Discord channel once in a while and see what's being discussed. Could be anything from our new Evil Lord badge to the Git Destroyer's new Mohawk. So you never know what they're talking about, but please do. And that's
one thing that we've been trying to really embrace on the open source side, is to be a place for people to collaborate, and not only around on Ortelius, how we're going to write it, design it, but also help each other out. I have this Kubernetes issue with GKE and GCR. How do I solve that? So we're really trying to open the community up to focus on, helping each other out and learning and teaching each other. Because what we're finding is we have a really wide range of expertise that have joined the project, which is great. And there's always seems to be somebody to answer a question, or at least point you in the right direction to get what you need.
And then I am going to quickly, since you guys have not seen the new front end, I am going to do like a 5-minute review of what the new front end looks like. I'll start down here at the domain level, and I'm really not going to go into the Deploy Hub Pro features. I'm just really going to keep track of what we're doing at the open source level. Here's how we now display what domains look like. In this case, we have 2 catalog domains. One's a store service and one's purchase processing. We also have a product or an application domain in the hipster store, which has subdomains that relate to dev, test, and prod, and those map to environments. We have a stress testing domain that has a load generator subdomain. But what's probably more important is how we break out the catalog domains and show the solution spaces and what they're solving. In this case, the purchase processing has 5 different subdomains that a microservice developer could publish their microservice to: currency, checkout, cart, payment, and shipping. Now at the highest level, this is what does not exist in the world anymore with microservices, and that is the logical application. As we drill down into how we break these things apart, we provide them a way to create their application package, or what we might call a product package, and provide them a way to see what other domains are available and what they can consume. For example, in this case, the cart service is being consumed by the hipster store, and it's the GC6 version. And you can see over here that they just selected it and drug it onto the palette to add it to their package. Now, when the component does change, we track that. So a new version of the cart service was updated. In this case, it was updated by a Circle CI workflow. You can see that when it was defined using a custom action of a Helm chart, and the Helm chart we executed was called the cart service. We do track the key value pairs, and these key value pairs can be mapped back to the environment, and we track where that cart service has been deployed, if it has been deployed. There can be cases where it's not been deployed yet. What's also important here is we're showing up front the blast radius. So we now know that if the cart service is updated, it's going to impact it's going to create the 1.2.10 version of the Labor Day sale, and it's going to create the 1.2.91 version of the 4th of July sale. So if we go back up to the application level now, and we take a look at the application is now listed as new, we have a new version of it. Even though the Hipster Store team themselves did not update their application, it did get a new version because the cart service was updated. And if we take a look at what occurred based on a cluster, we can take a look at the details for that. And we can still see now that what we call, this is like a traditional bomb report. And we can also see down pretty quickly what changed. So in this case, if we do a comparison between the new version of the Hipster Store and the base version, the only thing that changed for the Hipster Store cluster itself was the cart service. So now we're elevating that data, and we're really pushing it right into your face. We've always, in the old version, we always had this data, but it wasn't shown in graphical images. And what we're learning is the more graphical images that we can use, the quicker the information is consumed and the easier it is to digest. So that is what we've done over the last 8 months. Any thoughts,
really nice.
questions?
It's very attractive.
Thank you, Doug.
And one of the things that Tracy showed on one of the slides around the GSOC Summer of Code, because we're going to be adding in additional relationships of the component sets, and then also down into what is in a container, all the dependencies at that level. One of the mini projects we have is revisiting the visualization that we have here, because we know that in the last 8 months, we've seen companies go from having 10 to 15 microservices. Now we go back and talk to the same companies, they're approaching 100 microservices. So seeing a company with 100 to 200 microservices is becoming very common in the last 8 months. So we're going to be revisiting that visualization, because we know that it'll get cluttered very quickly.
Definitely, as it scales. Yeah. One question on, you mentioned earlier in the slides on kind of a catalog, and there's some pretty interesting things. How would you vision that fitting into the UI maybe?
That's a good question. I'll show you where we would put it. And Steve actually has already tried to. So here all of that data goes back to at the component level. So if we just think about it from the component level, we need to rework this screen in particular. See how everything is now in one big box? What we're going to have to do is create smaller groupings potentially. So for example, maybe general information isn't so broad. General information is maybe the name and who the owner is and the owner's email, or how to connect to Slack or something. And then we'll have to start sectioning off these other areas for this other data, which is what we would call that support data. So it's going to have to go in that area itself. Now, anything at the component level is going to have to roll up to the application level. And what I'm hoping that we'll probably do more of a more drilling within the maps potentially. So if you wanted to see the data related to any of the consuming components, that we could do it based on maybe a hyperlink in some way, or have a components data tab over here that you could go look at the detail. So that is a great question, Tim, and it's one that we're scratching our head and saying, what's the easiest way to show this information, because it always rolls up. And we're trying to show it at the highest level so that an application team can view it, or a particular microservice developer can view it based on what they need to see.
Yeah,
I think it's a great step. I think it's an awesome chunk of information to capture, just to be clear. There's companies just building entire offerings on just trying to capture that, and you do want it right next to all of the application and the deployments a lot of times. So I do see a lot of power with that.
Yeah, I think that is in particular being able to track it based on these versions so that they understand that this was these are the changes and this is where the changes came from and this is the data about those changes. So I think being able to display it up at the application level is probably going to be the most critical part.
And
So
one of the interesting things is when you look at, this component has been deployed, we've talked to people that have 17 QA environments, and, which means they're in the 17 QA environments, they could be running multiple clusters or, that the component's been delivered to. So it really becomes this cascading, N of N of N, type of trickle effect that you have to track. So if something breaks in one of the QA environments and you want to get to the logs or the telemetry, that you can be able to drill down and find it here very easily as part of that. So we're going to have to rework some of the layout to deal with that scenario.
Yeah, the other place you could always extend that is runbooks and things like that.
not to suggest a huge addition, but I could say that one other area that we've been drilling into, and I've had some conversations in the past with Azure folks too around this, is this topic of more than just the application relationships, the infrastructure relationships as well. As you mentioned, there's lots of YAML files, and increasingly the cloud resources and requirements are intermingled with application configuration and other kinds of details. And so those things are getting versioned increasingly more and more together. In fact, recently, that's been something that we've been investing a lot in, is figuring out the infrastructure as code workflows as part of the GitOps workflows, as part of the safety and delivery of changes. So if I was to change some aspect of my infrastructure configuration, like adjusting my firewalls or making a change in terms of load balancers or security certs or whatever it might be, that those changes would go through a validation workflow and in delivery, the same as software change. My point here, though, is with the power of being able to see the question of what has changed. Most of the tooling that I've seen in lots of places, the infrastructure changes are not always done the same way that software changes are. And so being able to see that, hey, all this infrastructure also changed, and that's what led to this problem.
And where are those infrastructure changes? Is that like a Terraform definition that's
we should use yeah, that's a great point. So we should use the big, there's lots of different places, right? There's the Terraform place that can be, this could be, Kubernetes or CRDs that I've updated for my, it could be another place that happens, and I'm going to use the big I for infrastructure, just meaning stuff outside of my application code, because that can include things like I've changed Jenkins jobs that impacted my application. At Netflix, we have a concept called fast properties, but it just figure like global persistent properties. Like I've changed those. That's led to plenty of incidences where we've tried to figure out how do we capture that. Launch Darkly, as an example, leans in on that idea of feature flags, and feature flags can lead to incidents when you change those, and you wouldn't see the answer to what's changed in that case in this view. But I think that what's changed concept is tremendously valuable. So if it was possible to make it so that maybe others could build in signals into this that could either say, hey, this application also depends on these things or these concepts, and be able to relate the changes that occurred over there to at least know that those changes were also things that happened on that cluster within a period of time. That would be amazing. That maybe I don't know if it's a federated model or however you would want to go about it, but being able to link those things together opens up all kinds of opportunities to say, like, just reset everything back to the way it was yesterday because it was working then. Maybe you don't actually want to do that, but at least you get a quick understanding of that.
Right.
And
right. Tracy's trying to ask a question.
Does Spinnaker know any of that information?
So Spinnaker knows some of it. And recently with the efforts around managed delivery, we have a vision for that to potentially encourage capturing of as much infrastructure as possible. It's a pluggable design. So it's CRD based, so you can add in new infrastructure configuration into it. And that's eventually we want to get to the place where essentially as much infrastructure as possible is captured and can be versioned and improved in a way that allows us to both validate those infrastructure changes from low risk environments to high risk environments. But also, I think there is that concept of being able to know these are all the things that my application cares about, which has all kinds of other opportunities to explore on its own as well. So I don't know. I don't want to just say managed delivery because it's new. It's a new initiative, and there's been a lot of work on it. But that concept, I think, is a powerful one.
Well, I might reach out to you on that topic, Michael. I have Isaac and I have a tentative. We were trying to get together to chat about both GitOps and what Spinnaker data can be pulled back in once it's been deployed, because we have those integrations, we can start tracking that. So I might reach out to you to be on a call with Isaac.
Yeah, a good SIG, just if you wanted to poke at that, is the Spinnaker as code SIG. I can send you info on that. And
okay.
In that SIG, this is exactly the kind of conversation that I think would be interesting. It's a different angle on it, but I think that would be a SIG that would have far more educated people than me on the details.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking we already have this object called an environment, and it's and we would just be adding, just like we're adding change data about a component that rolls up to an application. We could store it at the environment level, which then rolls up to the application.
Well, 100%.
And one of the things that I've been thinking about is we actually start versioning environments. So whenever there is a change made to an environment, and an environment is just a collection of endpoints. So we would actually create versions of an environment. So anytime that an environment changes, we capture that and persist it somewhere.
You got to join the SIG, because that's just exactly what was just added into the managed delivery stuff. So it doesn't mean, I think these concepts are compatible and connect. The point of the versioned environments in the managed delivery situation was specifically to be able to say, safely introduce infrastructure changes. So when an environment is a logical collection of infrastructure, actually. And so when that infrastructure changes because you've either rolled out new software or you've changed some other configuration, the concept is that that's captured in a way that can allow you to both safely introduce it and test it, and then roll the whole thing back to a previous state. So versioning is a brand new thing that I think is getting it was just committed a couple days ago, or is like right on the edge of committing. So you got to join that SIG.
Okay, we will.
Okay. That'd be a good opportunity to engage on that topic.
Because Phil Gibbs was way ahead of us, all of us on this topic, and that's why he built this amazing domain-based relational database with a versioning engine, basically is what it is. So you can track all of those kinds of relationships. And
yeah, we're all tickling around the same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the interesting part is that we keep going back and forth on is we like to take a proactive approach, saying this is what it's going to look like, what your view of your world is going to look like before you go and apply it to an environment. And then, that's one way to handle it is this is what's going to change if you do this to this environment compared to its current state. The other way is to be the reactive, and something does get changed, we react and record it at that level. I think the proactive is much more, avoids a lot of potential problems that you could have when you make a change. The reactive is more recording it, more trying to just give you a history or an audit of what's happened.
My take, given that we're kind of focused on solving a specific category of problems that we see at Netflix, even though it does apply outside, would be that conceptually, I think these things connecting is great, but I would imagine there's already been discussion about, you mentioned Terraform, right? There's lots of different places configuration and infrastructure exists. And so, as much as this becomes an extendable concept of environments here, I think that would be where it could get interesting. Like, how could you leverage, if managed delivery becomes a thing outside of Netflix, how could that fit into this? But existing companies or existing ways of solving this problem, like you mentioned, Terraform or Kubernetes or other mechanisms for defining the infrastructure aspects of your environment as those get iterated on, how could those plug in? I think would be exciting. So yeah.
And the interesting part is there's, like, what you're describing does not fit into the GitOps world very well because all the relationships that need to be managed. So it's one of those, two different worlds are kind of clashing. The concept of, state management is right on, but the persistence of that data through a Git repository, I think, is a little backwards.
Yeah, we've had a similar notion where we've struggled with the idea of a true GitOps flow where, Git is actually the source of truth. That comes into conflict a lot when you need to have essentially, you want to know this. It's the source of truth of what's desired, but that's actually not always it's not always up to date. And so there's a lot of risk there because certain operational actions, like if you were to roll this whole environment back through, deploy hub, you need to then update you need to figure out what you're going to do if your repository now thinks that the environment should be on a certain version that it shouldn't be, or certain details are incorrect. And so then you'd open up a PR flow. And so that during that time, your environment's actually not correct. And it's actually not even the desired state anymore. So that workflow is one that we've also had some challenges with figuring out how to reconcile. Sorry, I didn't mean to dominate the conversation.
No.
No, that's what this is here. That's what we're here for, to get feedback and have discussion. We are 4 minutes though before our hour is up, and I don't want to take any. I don't want to go over because I know everybody's busy. Thank you everybody for your involvement here, your input, and your kind mentoring over the course of the last few years. For those of you who have been here from the beginning, I think we've made some really great progress in terms of adoption. We are starting to see now some of the open source users are starting to now adopt the product, and we're seeing adoption overall starting to increase. What we learned in 2020 was there were a lot of companies who were just starting to use microservices, and they begin to hit a wall around 20 microservices if they have multiple clusters. So we're seeing more and more of the market now starting to move in that direction, and we're starting to get a lot more inbound traffic and inbound leads, and building in terms of Deploy Hub Pro, building that funnel, which is not a discussion for here, but I think it's interesting information for the board to know that there are more people using microservices today than there were a year ago. It's starting to change.
There were fewer
That
reviews.
have to be managed.
What was that, Doug?
So if there were fewer, we'd be worried.
True. But what we're seeing sometimes is they're using microservices and then they deploy them monolithically in their own namespaces as a big giant application.
Yeah, you see that a lot. Distributed monoliths.
I don't know.
Exactly.
And I think that it's almost like the same way as, and I think back of during our object-oriented programming days where we had this idea of shared libraries and then people stopped using them as shared. They would copy them, put them in their own repository and move forward with them by renaming them. So we started out down a SOA kind of process and then went right back to monolithic. And I think that we're doing the same thing with when we put a whole application borrowing on shared services, but shove them into their own namespace so that, and then version that because it's the only way to logically create the application. We're hoping that we can simplify that with this model. All right, all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
I will.
Great to see everybody.
This is recorded, and I'll make sure and share it with everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Nice to see you. See you later.
You too.
Good to see you.